Welcome friends to another r/maliciouscompliance video. If you want to know you did something meaningful today, all you gotta do is hit the like and subscribe buttons down below. That said, our first story of the day is by Sir Corn. Open offices suck, but I've proven my point. Okay, so I just turned 20 and was the youngest guy at a company I just half a year ago started working for. This guy, which was just a bit older, was over 30, but he and I could get along really well, and I was lucky, since I'm quite an introvert, that he took me into a small group of really nice colleagues that were more friends than just work buddies. The office we worked in looked really nice, but all the levels were connected with a large open area. So when someone on the first floor was making a call, people on the third floor could follow the entire conversation. This wasn't a huge deal most of the time because we always had a radio turned on and people who wanted to concentrate just put on headphones. Overall, a very informal workplace and no real management layer, just a couple of directors and no actual managers. Me and the rest of the group were sitting on the top floor, and since my buddy was a lunatic, we were laughing and just chatting a bit. In comes a message from the CEO asking me to come into the meeting room, which was only one of 2 closed offices in the entire building. This wasn't that strange since, even though I was young, I had particular skills which the company relied on, so they often asked if I could join a meeting. But this time, only the CEO sat there, and instead of the usual joking around, he asked me to sit down like a school principal would if you did something wrong. I noticed that you're coming along nicely with a lot of your colleagues, and I think they really have respect for you. The thing is, it's rather noisy lately, but I don't want them thinking I'm sort of a police officer demanding them to stay quiet since we're all friends in here. So I want you to keep the noise levels down and tell them to stay productive. I told them that I would pass on the message, but that it didn't look like it was my place to tell the people who worked here for years, and are all at least 10 years older than I was, that they had to obey my authority, since I didn't feel I had any. Well, since the rest of the group dug into the meeting calendar and found out that there wasn't any planned, they instantly looked at me when I came back with those big eyes which are ready for gossip. I passed on the message and they were all a bit shocked, stating that they were like this for years and never had any trouble. A couple of weeks later, I got called into the meeting room again by the CEO. My colleagues directly noticed how I walked away from my desk, that I was called in again, as I had my head worried about what the issue was this time. No one else was called in the meantime, just me. And yes, I was asked to sit down again, and the CEO began with a huge sigh. The office is still very noisy. I had a really simple request to keep it down and you just couldn't listen. You're even the one talking the loudest of all. I was raised to not interrupt people, but that time I did and said, "Well, you stated before that I have a deep voice, which carries through the entire building. Since then, I've done my best to keep my voice down." It didn't matter. He continued his lecture. In the end, he made a conclusion saying, "I didn't want to do this, but I'm going to split you guys up. You guys are no longer allowed to sit where you want, even though we have a flexible workspace. I'm starting with you. You'll be sitting across me on the first floor. It's not for the noise, it's just better for your productivity. I'll be informing the rest and you're not allowed to discuss this with them at all." So, being both pissed as well as flabbergasted, I took my laptop and backpack without saying a word and moved to the first floor. I picked up my headphones, which I normally never use, put them on and went to town on my work. This became my routine for 2 weeks, and if someone had a question, I'd say, "Sorry, I have to concentrate on my work." If they needed me in a meeting in order to get a new client, I responded with, "I won't be able to be as productive as I need to be." And most of all, I worked exactly the hours I was paid to, instead of coming in 30 minutes early and staying 30 minutes longer as well. The CEO started noticing me turning bitter and tried turning it around, saying, "Hi OP, lovely day ain't it?" Which I responded to with, "Uh-huh," and putting on my headphones again. "Want me to grab you a cup of coffee?" "No, I'm good, thanks." Even though I still worked my butt off during working hours, it became noticeable that the hourly rate dropped, and my colleagues started complaining to the directors that they really needed my expertise, but that I wasn't available to them. The CEO loved calling me into his office, but now that he had to admit to his defeat, I just received a small message while he sat across me. "You're free to sit wherever you want. It has come to my attention that it's in the interest of the company if I give you and your colleagues a bit more freedom." He continued to bug me about leaving 5 minutes early, even if I came in 30 minutes before I had to, but he never dared talk about my work ethics ever again. Moral of the story, don't try to push for more productivity, it might backfire. Oh, and open offices suck. I mean, the one good thing about open offices is it's great for micromanagers. Do you personally believe the concept of an open office is a good thing or a bad thing? Open office layout, of course, being a room where every employee works together without cubicles, without walls, just a pretty big room with desks arranged around the room, and everybody's in there together. Is that good or bad? Let me know in the comments down below. Our next story is by Sandor Yarp Clegane. Wanna only talk to my kid's mother? You got it. So this has been about 10 years ago now. I don't remember exactly what the issue was over, probably grades or behavior. Nonetheless, I get a call one day from one of my kids' teachers. "Hi, this is teacher. Can I speak to Mrs. Yarp?" I say, "This is Mr. Yarp. How can I help you?" They say, "I need to speak to Mrs. Yarp." I say, again, "This is Mr. Yarp. How can I help you?" They say, "I'll just call back and talk to Mrs. Yarp." I say, "Okay, but..." Click. I don't think too much of it and continue my day. A few days later, I get essentially the same call. Teacher refuses to speak to me and will only speak to Mrs. Yarp. About a week later, my kid brings home a letter from the teacher saying they need to speak to Mrs. Yarp, and here's an appointment for her to show up on X date at X time. I get upset. This happens a lot. Doctor's office, various appointments, having a hard time wrapping their head around a single male parent. Many times I got, "Oh, well, usually the mom brings them," or "Usually mom takes care of this." Those lines always pissed me off to no end, and I would always make them eat their words by saying, "Well, mom can't do this since she died insert years ago." I always liked the look of shock and horror on their faces when they processed that information. Anyways, cue malicious compliance. I am beyond pissed that this teacher refuses to talk to me and only wants mom. So the day of the meeting, I get the paper she requested, get dressed up, grab a copy of my wife's death certificate, and the icing on the cake, my wife's urn. I walk into the school with the items, and when the teacher comes into the office, she said something along the lines of, "I specifically said mom needs to be here." I say loud enough that all the staff in the office can hear, "Mom is absolutely here, right here in this urn. Here's the death certificate. Go on, talk to her. Tell her whatever you need to tell her you refuse to tell me." All the other staff looked while she just turned red from embarrassment. What was it for? What did she need to tell my wife so bad she refused to speak to me? My daughter was doing fantastic in math, and she wanted to put her in advanced math. After that, I filed a complaint with the principal. The next school year, the teacher wasn't at the school. I don't know if she moved or was fired, but that's my malicious compliance. Let me tell ya, in all the times I read malicious compliance stories, very seldom is there a time where OP drives a point as harshly and as clearly as OP did right here. You want to talk about sending a message? You want to talk about trying to change somebody's mindset as far as handling things go in the future events? This would be one of them. All I can really say is my condolences to OP and thanks to OP for sharing this story with us. This next story is by Griselda Loves Cats. You said to pick it up. When I was in elementary school, my mom went back to work and then to grad school. For the first year or two, we had a sitter after school. It was one of the girls from up the street, and we loved her. Mom usually left a chore list with the very reasonable chores expected for that day. We knew them already, the list was so the sitter knew what was expected. One Friday, the sitter noticed that the list only said, "Pick up living room," so we did. We picked everything up and moved it about an inch. It took all three of us to lift the couch, but we managed it. Mom got home late that night. Saturday morning, we were watching cartoons when she got up. She noticed all the stuff that wasn't put away and asked why we didn't do our Friday chores. Bro and I got this huge grin and told her that we did. All she said was to pick it up. She didn't say anything about putting anything away. She laughed. When the cartoons were over, we had to go put things where they belonged. That was my favorite sitter of all time. And no, my parents were not mad at her at all. Future lists were much more specific. Well, listen, if you got a couple smart Alecs running around, sometimes you gotta be overly specific. Otherwise, you might have to be a little stern with them because the last thing you want to do is give in to their contrarian ways. The more you let that kind of thing slide, the more you're just basically encouraging it. Our next story is by Remy LeBeau, Toilet Seat Defeated. My partner loves to remind me to put the toilet seat down, maybe even revels in the request. She's afraid of falling in the toilet, which I still don't understand. This has never happened to me. Over the last year, I've not only put the seat down, but also the lid. Now she must always check the seat so it's in the proper position, like I always have. I just love this small win and wanted to share. I think this is a great compromise for relationships where there may be any kind of arguing or bickering about it, because not only does it make the copious amounts of work it is to lift or close a seat balanced for everybody in the relationship, but it's also just the most hygienic thing to do. You're supposed to have the lid shut, otherwise when you're flushing, all those particles are going all over your bathroom. You have your toothbrush out in the open? Think about it. And our final story of the day is by Tubist61, Do Exactly What You're Told. Back in my days working as a paramedic, I spent some time in the training school teaching clinical skills to new staff. We also had a driving section where we trained staff in response driving and also trained up new trainers. These are a couple stories the head driving instructor had. One of the issues you find in teaching people to drive at speed is the red mist problem. Things are happening really fast and your attention narrows. This can be quite dangerous. This is something the driver instructors see when they have staff driving at high speeds, and one of the consequences is that the student drivers focus closely on what they're asked to do and follow instructions literally to the letter. When training new instructors, the senior instructors apply very specific malicious compliance, or as they call it, puppet driving. The idea is the senior instructor drives and interprets the student instructor's instructions exactly. The student instructor has to think very carefully about the instructions the driver is given. One example of this is the student instructor wants the driver to accelerate. If they say, "Put your foot down," then the senior instructor will accelerate the vehicle as fast as they can along the road. If the student instructor then says, "Whoa, slow down," then the senior instructor will hit the brakes hard and carry out an emergency stop. Teaches you to think about what you're saying. The best story we heard of this was a chap who was doing really well in his instructor training, but sometimes didn't think too carefully about what he asked. The senior instructor took 3 trainees out to work on corners and bends. This is all about the smooth transitions with careful road positioning on entering a bend, understanding the apex and where to accelerate on leaving the bend. The senior instructor was playing the part of a driver, not getting the idea, and was making jerky transitions and positioning the car badly. They were following a civilian who was taking a really nice line in the bends, so the trainee instructor said, "Follow their line." So the instructor followed the instructions exactly. The drive was out in Lincolnshire in the UK, a flat country, few hills, fast roads, and some nice corners and bends. The car in front was moving quite quickly, and the senior instructor was doggedly following their line through the bends. That was right up to the point where the civilian misjudged a bend and went a foot or so off onto the verge. They held the car and got back onto the road. The senior instructor followed the instructions he was given exactly and followed the line onto the verge. The driving school car was bigger and heavier, so it didn't go back onto the road. It went a little further off the road. The other thing about Lincolnshire is there's some really nice houses, and this was the case at this bend. There was a very nice house, and in front of it was an immaculate front lawn. It could be described as a bowling green, perfectly mowed with those stripes you see, and surrounded by a border of cottage garden plants. Into this idyllic setting came the driving school car, a 1.5 tons of V6 powered metal, traveling at 60 miles per hour. The senior instructor braked hard, pulled the wheel round, floored the accelerator, and aimed back at the road, carving a pair of deep ruts in the lawn as it went. As the car got back onto the road, the trainee instructor yelled, "Stop!" And sure enough, an emergency stop followed with skid marks and clouds of smoke. At this point, the senior instructor turned to the student instructor and said, "Okay, how could you have worded your instructions differently?" I will say I understand the methodology of this learning exercise. That said, I don't think it's the safest. I guess the experienced instructor would know not to do something that could put their lives in jeopardy, but going off the road while driving at 60 miles per hour sounds pretty dangerous. I don't think there would be too many places that would just let that slide normally. Don't worry, it was part of training. Yeah, well, you could have rolled the vehicle. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So of all these stories I've read today, which is your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you haven't yet, if you could like and subscribe, that would mean a lot to me. Whatever you do, whether it's liking, subscribing, turning notifications on, all of it helps grow this channel and I appreciate the heck out of it. So until next time, I'll see you all tomorrow with some more stories.